The series was made possible by generous donations by the Westridge Foundation, all of our MOAD members, and you who join us every time. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled today to welcome my illustrious guest. Paul Mpagi Sepuya is a Los Angeles-based artist working in photography. His work is in the collections of the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Getty and Guggenheim Museums, the Hamburg Museum, LACMA, MoCA Los Angeles, MoMA, SFMoMA, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Tate and the Whitney Museum, among others. His work has been covered in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Art in America, The Nation, and The Guardian, and was featured on the cover of ARTFORUM's March 2019 issue. Recent museum exhibitions include those at the Barbican Centre, the Guggenheim Museum, the Getty Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, SFMoMA, and a project for the 2019 Whitney Biennial. A survey of work from 2006 to 2018 was presented at CAM St. Louis and Blaffer Art Museum, accompanied by a monograph published by CAM St. Louis and Aperture Foundation. Sepuya's solo exhibition of new works at Vielmetter Los Angeles opened in September 2022, with a sibling solo opening in November at the Deichtorhallen in Hamburg. Let me know if I said that wrong. I probably butchered it. He is Associate Professor in Media Arts at the University of California, San Diego. And Paul, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, good, good. Been a busy week for you?
It's a busy time. I mean, yeah, it's always busy. And there's
Yeah.
a lot going on, and yeah, there's a lot going on at the UCs, but it's the end of the quarter, and anyways, that's
Oh man, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, there is a lot of drama going on with the UCs right now, and I'm sure you're in the thick of that.
yes.
Yeah. You're like, and we're gonna leave it at that. But also, just I mean, I just read your bio. You've been a very, very busy bee. I mean, your work has been popping up everywhere, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to sit in this virtual space with you, and have this conversation. I've been a fan of your work ever since I don't even remember the first time I encountered your work. I feel like it's been a good decade almost at this point. But your work just, I don't have to tell anyone who's on this call, anyone who is joining us, I'm sure everyone knows who you are and has interacted with your work, but there's a quality to it that the moment you see it, it just compels you. It draws you in. And so, congratulations on all the success and all of the accomplishments you've had in the last couple of years, and I'm sure things that are coming up soon as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Did you travel to Berlin? Were you at that opening?
I was. It's in Hamburg, which is like
It's in Hamburg,
West Germany, kind of like I had never been there before, so I went for the installation and the opening. Yeah, so
incredible.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome. So, like you, I am an educator. I'm the director of education at MOAD. We interact with a lot of students, a lot of teachers. So I really like to come from that place of education. And as an artist, as a creative practitioner, what sparked your interest in becoming an artist? When did you know that this was a path for you?
I guess it was high school or something. I was always, drawing and painting and doing all that kind of stuff, all ceramics classes in school, and taking the painting classes. But I don't know if I had thought of, it's like, it's funny, like going back and like what did I think, or what did I remember, like, so much when so much time has passed. But you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a computer scientist. And I was really into programming and all of that stuff, like you know, it's old Commodore computers, and everything. But in high school, I took I think it was between the summer of my sophomore and junior years, I think. Took a photo class at UC Riverside.
Oh, wow.
Black and white dark class, after I'd been kind of just like playing around taking pictures and stuff like that. But I think that was when I realized that you could go to school for it, and you could, like, it was something to do. And I think it was around then, like definitely by my junior year of high school, I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I don't even know if I knew what being an artist was, or, you know, I was just like, I went to NYU to study photography. And I just, you know, I had kind of started to discover some artists here and there. But I think my idea was like pop, commercial, editorial photography. And then you just kind of discover other things along the way.
Okay.
Got into it. Also, like, heads up, I have like no good lighting in my, like, all my lighting in my house after it goes dark is just like low lighting. So I'm sitting in front of a window. I have no like bright lights in my house. So we're gonna go with this, and I might descend into darkness at some point. But just to let you know, for everyone out there, I'm gonna do my best, or I might just have to turn on the bad lights and just deal with whatever happens.
You know, I love that for you, actually, that you know, just kind of looking into your work, I have noticed. I'm just gonna jump right into that. Yes, yeah, like Sade says, you have really nice fall light, and I know around here it's gonna get dark in the next 30 minutes probably for you. But you know, let's just jump into the fact that you don't really use lighting for your photography. You rely on the natural light. Sorry that I'm just completely going to curveball and following that train of thought. Except for in, you know, this for me, current work that you've been doing most recently, where you're working with the red light at night. And I know we're going to get into some of that. But I'm just really curious about your choice for focusing on natural light. I mean, I know you're raised in Southern California, you're in Los Angeles right now. You already have some of the best light in the entire world, but you know, what's this about your desire to stray away from studio lighting?
Oh, so yeah, it's funny. Like, yeah, I'm in LA and I'm from here-ish, but I've never thought of like Southern, like California and like the light or like place as really having anything to do with work. I just don't think that studio light, that like strobes look good in a studio. In a way that is not intrusive, that is kind of creating like the moment, like an artist studio is like a completely artificial space, but it can bring in things from the outside world, and it can when it's like really inhabited or lived in a sense, become a comfortable space. And there's just something about like strobes or the kind of like constructed set that is used in like commercial, like in a lot of like commercial editorial photography or product photography, that is very just like, no thank you. And it's not like a value judgment, but that's just in a studio space. There's, you know, because the way that the light is shaped, in order to get a kind of like, if anyone has experience like working with like additional lighting.
Mhm.
You have to do so much to construct in a way something that makes it look like there's no light. But anyways, I don't know. But I mean, in all of the earliest work that I did up in like 2004 to 2010, all with lighting.
Oh, okay.
All of the domestic portraits, I guess I call them domestic portraits, the portraits that were done in homes, in Brooklyn, mostly in Brooklyn and mostly in my home. That was all strobe. One mono head bounced in a room, and that kind of had, I wasn't interested in the sense of time or like mood in lighting. But sorry, there's like so many ways to kind of talk about it. But yeah, when I started doing a couple of residencies at Center for Photography in Woodstock, and then at the Studio Museum in Harlem, I stopped using artificial lighting because it just looked bad. And it was interesting to just let the light do what it wanted to do. And in the first images, well, no, I'll skip over that. But I mean, I've been in a studio space in like East LA for the last 6 years or something like that. And it's the two spaces that I've been in have both been on the top floor of a converted warehouse, so there's skylights.
That's incredible.
I make work with skylights, but yeah, most recently I've been thinking about I have been making images across different times of day, and began by using like the safe lights as the form of illumination.
Safe lights.
I could makes sense to share pictures, right?
Yeah, it would be great to jump in. I know I wanted to go into your history, your background, but I'm like, as soon as you started talking about the light, it really had me intrigued.
Yeah, like I mean, so yeah, we can get back to other stuff, but like this is, I think, like these twilight images I feel like are really key, because it's this moment where like the daylight is fading, and it's at these moments where it's kind of this in between balance between the red light, the safe light. So it's just some stands and some hardware store $5 clip light things, and the safe lights were those are so low watt, they're like 6 watt. So I actually found LEDs that I could dial to the same color temperature. Right. At this point, yeah, it's like in a photo lab, you could just use LEDs dialed into the right color to allow for like a safe processing and developing of film and prints. But I switched to using the LEDs rather than the original darkroom safe lights because I needed a higher wattage so that I wasn't having to make like 30, 60-second exposures. I could just switch to doing like 4 or 5 second exposures. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, when I saw this and you were saying, I didn't realize at first that you were literally talking about the lights that are used in traditional photography to protect the film from exposure, right? Or the paper when you're printing. So you're literally referencing the traditional process of photography through the use of this light. I was reading it as red light,
Oh no, because like if you go here, like this is the space, like these are images of the space in daylight, photographing in daylight.
Wow.
This is all daylight work. I'll just go through this really quick. We can come back to any of these images. I know you were like, let's do 10 images, but it's like, it's good to have a lot of things. But you can see, and I organized this going from like daylight to the twilight, and then we can see the images that are made under the safe lights, the red lights. So anyways, light. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And so there's, yeah, with these safe light photographs, there's this really, I guess because of the long exposure time, but it almost feels like you're moving. For me, they feel like it's maybe a still from a film or something. It's definitely adding this brand new element that's really exciting to your work. I think it's because of the motion, and we're getting the traces of motion, but also this blurring of who the figure is, which I know you've done that sometimes with just a hand over, or a body in front of another figure. But this, can you kind of talk about the impetus for you going into this space? Is it what does this really add to your body of work by bringing in this different element with the safe lights?
Oh, I mean, I think it's been an interesting way to think about more clearly, or sort of like bring more to the forefront how conditions of illumination, what forms of light allow for or suggest different ways of like inhabiting and acting and performing in spaces. That's like, I've been thinking about like the language of just like the term dark room between like in the work from projects from the last 5 years that kind of preceded this, that was like these images made that are taking place under or in front of what would, the dark cloth in photography. And thinking about that, the back rooms, the dark room, this has sort of like a social, like a queer social and erotic space. And thinking about like the red light, like again, we have a single space. We have the history of the daylight studio, history of illumination under the red light, whether it's a kind of an attunement to the development and the emerging processing of images, a kind of like intimacy that a photographer has in analog space, but also like the dance floor, like the club, like the dark room in the club or at the back bar. So but those both things are about like conditions of illumination and how things are made visible, and the sense and what kind of carries through moments of initial visual or tactile like touch and like sense. Yeah,
that's awesome. I mean, and just kind of as you're talking about this, and the fact that you're bringing in you're thinking about the traditional studio, the daylight studio, as well as the lit studio. You're also bringing in light to kind of reference these spaces. I've read lots. I went through a lot of your articles that have been written about your work, and a lot of curatorial statements, as well as art writers and art critics really talk about your work, or they position it in this space of interrogating the medium of photography itself. And I'm just really curious to know if that is your intent, or is this really the reading by folks who are trying to position, your work in the space? Because I feel like your work also fits into multiple spaces, and that's what's so intriguing to me. It's like it's to talk about your work is not a simple process, right? It's very complicated on many levels. So just, I'm curious, like, do you see yourself as like these acts of you including the camera sometimes within the photograph, this black velvet cloth, the smudges on the mirrors, are all these ways for you to kind of interrogate, critique or speak to photography in itself?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that that's one of the things that let me see, maybe I'll pull up like an older image, or I actually don't even have, I mean, but maybe even like this is an image that kind of makes sense. Yeah, the thing is, that's what I've wanted the work to be about, but it's using the kind of the idea of just like the structure and the formation and the like all of the history and desire and everything that just like coalesces in this thing called like a camera. That's about kind of like that reworks vision and makes other kinds of vision possible. But it's like, but kind of going to the underlying questions of the medium through like the subject, like my subjective position, right? And like looking at it through like how elements of my desire were that have been shaped by the camera, and also like reflected like through friendship and relationships, and then like along the way with the way in which like when I started using the black velvet after using these other fabrics, right? Because I started, when I was making images with the mirrors, I realized like it's hard to see, but in spots like this where you catch the little rim of this photo reflector, you start to see smudges that are left behind. Because this is a picture that was made after my friend Evan had leaned against this mirror while I took a portrait of him. There's like this other portrait of him. He's just like in this like white t-shirt and blue jeans leaning against here. This is an image made after that, but only against black can you see the traces of what was left behind. And that's what led to kind of like constructing, if you imagine constructing the space, which is like enveloping a mirror in black. It's like recreating kind of like a version of like the dark cloth, right? That allows for the vision to be from a camera to be seen, and then entering into that space and making images was really about thinking about like, oh, there's all of this other, you can get to these questions of latency, of indexicality through having to look through black material, you know, and so I don't have any of those specific images where it's really about emphasizing that surface. So I apologize for that, but that, I mean, it's what you start to see in images like this, right? But it was thinking about, okay, I want to use think about like how black as a concept tied to how it makes certain really beautiful information visible, rather than making work that's about that, making the work where the point of it is to visualize in a way to define what blackness or queerness is as like identifiable categories or something like that, if that makes sense. So there's always going to be representation tied to photography, but the point of mine has not been for the purpose of representation. But like you said, it was, you know, kind of trying to undermine the kind of like formal and conceptual, you know, those spaces that have kind of not wanted or have thought for a long time that they could not necessarily include like Black subjects or queer sociability as tied to the medium, if that makes sense. Like in
for
a
sure.
formal context, because we use those things when we approach very meaningful subjects of that pull in from these other disciplines of sociology, of politics, of history, right? Like photography is so tied to those, right? But and so Black subjects, queer subjects get brought in when we're talking about ideas of justice, when we're talking about ideas of equity, etc. But I was like, there's still this space where people can pretend to have this conversation where they're like, oh, it's just about the medium and this can be excluded. So where representation becomes of interest is like trying to just like put some gay Black sexy pictures into a space that otherwise may not have them.
Yeah.
It's
No, that completely makes sense. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a freaking genius. So, these little elements that, again, that's what's like your work evades a simple explanation. I think, you're addressing so many deep concepts over and over again that are critical. And I think one of the things also with your work is, I definitely when you're seeing Black bodies and queer Black bodies and intimacy between Black bodies, this is still revolutionary in 2022 for some reason, because we don't see enough of it. Your work, even in the examples that you have, your work goes beyond that. And I'm really intrigued by your use of moving away from, paid or professional models per se, and, really bringing in people who are your actual community members, which I think is why we see so much representation in the work that you have. It's a little bit of everyone, and there's not one exclusive body type, and I'm kind of like going through your work, I see also this, when the models are, or the subjects are looking at us, there's often this really soft gaze that's happening, and it's not one, it's like you're not exoticizing your subject in any kind of way, and there's also not, in most of the work, I see that there's not this suggestiveness, like there's not this active seduction happening, at least through the way that the viewer, even in a situation where there's absolutely no clothes involved, oftentimes, it's kind of like this, I'm here, this is me kind of thing. I don't get this like I'm trying to pull you in or seduce you or whatever with this. And I'm really intrigued by that quality with your work. And just really curious as to where that space comes from, and then also how do you get to that space with the models? I mean, we're so trained to smile or to relay some kind of emotion, but there's also this just soft, sensual thing going on with your work.
Yeah, I mean, I've like, since shortly after undergrad, I stopped photographing strangers. Because I just wasn't interested in really, like, the pictures couldn't hold my interest. And I realized like so much of the, asking myself like why in what ways I like initially picked up a camera even before thinking about being an artist was about making pictures of people that I knew and kind of cared about, but also that like there's a mutual ongoing relationship to the work, if that makes sense, right? Like the model relationship feels really transactional.
Mm-hmm.
That thing of like, okay, you book a person, you pay them, they sign a release, you make an image, you get this image, and then your responsibility to that person kind of like ends.
Yeah,
right? You've got like a product, you've got content or whatever it may be. But like, I'm more interested in, like in these works, it's also about maintaining friendships and, many that, stretch for years, whether it's like these images, or if I kind of go back to like some of like the earliest, like, I mean, this isn't the earliest, but some earlier work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess as time goes by, this will start to be the earliest work. But so I think of all of these in a sense as being inseparable from those friendships, you know, behind these, even when the subjects aren't, like you were talking about, like whether when people are looking in the camera or not, you know, there's this thing where like friendship and conversation and community and all these things are like the starting point before making any images. But then there are these ones where I'm interested in, like, okay, what is a portrait? And then when does something become something else, right? This is like, in a sense, like me and like Abdi, who's in this image, and people who are close to him who would recognize his silhouette will have like one sort of like relationship to this work where it could sort of function as a portrait. But in another sense, it's like a formal image about like transparency, translucency, kind of like a sense of being present, but like in this, he's not able to see the image that's being made, you know, but actually neither can I'm also outside, you know, there's all these, so they're like formal images about something else, or like, you know, or like this darkroom mirror one with Victor. Again, it's about this sort of like, for me, this is kind of like about balance, a kind of a sense of like trying to make an image that is formal in a very specific way, but is created in this space where like you're balancing kind of like excess.
So gorgeous.
Like, you know, these here are, I guess, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of calling these portraits, like this is a portrait of Ahmed here, and this is a portrait of Michael, but they're not, you know, they're not super direct in the way in which like Brontes and Jake are here. You know, so it's interesting. I've been having I've been making sure to kind of keep images where there is this direct kind of like look happening, but also I'm like really interested in like these images here, like this one where, you know, it's titled Model Study in a way because it's like Caleb is in this work, but it's about this sort of like process that we're all engaged in, of like this closed loop of constructing and consuming our own image, with the understanding that that whole process is like visible and actually solicitous to like the rest of the world out there, you know, but it's also a play on like this like art historical concerns, like of like Michael Fried, and this idea of like absorption that goes back to these paintings of this 18th century, where you have like someone in the painting who's so engaged in the thing that they're doing that the viewer isn't even a part of the equation. It's like, we are not part of this equation that's happening here, but like in real life, when you can, or like, can I zoom in on this? Like,
I don't know if you can, but I mean, I can already imagine that there's these, he's looking at himself, and then it's a reflection in the mirror, and you know, then you've got this repeating and infinite vision back and forth, right?
Yeah, but like in these, the screen kind of points to the fact that like, you know, this image was made over a year ago, is just now being exhibited for the first time of a week ago in Germany. But there's
really?
a whole set of images that have been made at the same moment of these that have already had a life in the world, right? It's like, in the same way when I was talking about like daylight, like introducing a set of time, like these ones introduce two sets of time. One is like the formal time of like the delay that happens in the artist studio, but then there's also the immediacy that escapes that through this.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Here, you know, or these images, right, where it's just like Bonnie here is just like, he's just looking at himself in the mirror here, you know, that it's
really, I didn't get that from that image. But I guess if he's that close to the mirror, he would be looking.
you know,
Yeah,
like we have
wow,
like reflection here, you know. So yeah, there's all these things that are kind of going on, and yeah, now I'm forgetting what there was like more to your question, but maybe
yeah. Well,
because of time we could go on to other.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely loop back to that. I do want to get to a question that popped up. Timothy asks, what is the role of abstraction in the red photos? How does the abstraction from movement, color, and light play into representation and or narrative? So I love that question.
Okay, I mean, abstraction is just, I mean, something that I kind of think about, and I sort of always sort of say, even when I'm doing like if I'm teaching like an intro to photo class, and I make, everyone starts shooting with like digital anyways, but I make all the students start for the first 4 weeks in black and white, just to remember like all photographs are abstractions, right? It's like we've made a device and a lens in a certain way that writes down on like film or our sensors like a three-dimensional world, like through certain optical principles. Like we could have decided to do other things. We could have decided to make cameras look like, the way like an ant or a fly sees the world, right? But we decided that like point perspective is the thing at the middle of it, right? So there's like, we see abstraction through time and perhaps through the almost monochrome of photographing under a red light. But also part of abstraction is the fact that this is the reinforcement of single point perspective. So like, even an image like this is abstraction. There's like an abstraction happening, but it's the way we process the images, they're very visible. I mean, it's legible. But so yeah, with like these and these, the abstraction comes from time, right? And movement. Like, in those early photographs where people had to sit for like a minute to get their picture taken.
Sure.
It was about like, okay, stay still. But in these, I'm not asking the subject to stay still. But there was another part to that question about abstraction or the
so how does the abstraction from movement, color, and light play into representation and or narrative?
Representation, maybe clarification on what kind of representation that means. Like, I mean, I think it's if it's about legibility, I think it's just kind of about like literally flipping a switch or something, or dialing something else in. But then in terms of that last part of it, narrative, I think maybe a picture like this, which is just kind of like a reference to Manet.
Oh wow.
And the Déjeuner sur l'herbe, in the park, and there's the four figures on the blanket, and the woman is nude, and the men are like smoking like hashish or something like that. That there's narrative, and in that sense, I don't really construct narrative in the pieces. I mean, this is the one that maybe comes the closest, because I have like 3 people engaged in conversation, who just happen to like all have taken their clothes off and be like sitting in a studio with a red light on, like you can even see like in the big version of it, there's like a half-drunk bottle of tequila over here and like some LaCroix, that like one could sort of construct a narrative. There's these like contact sheet style ones where, I'm thinking about like the Muybridge motion studies, right? So I guess it's narrative, but you sort of get like a bit of a sense of like how time might unfold in this space. But it's, yeah, I mean, those are open-ended questions. I guess what I'm saying is like, I'm pointing to things that ask questions about those, but I'm not like aiming to to solve those or be like, okay, this is exactly what it's about in the work. Sure. So I appreciate that the questions come up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this also points me to, I was able to see a few of these as well as some of the other ones that are in this deck. I just happened to be in LA, and I was like, I have to go check out Vielmetter projects. And I don't know if that was the first time, but for me, it was my first time experiencing the fact that you broke down the photography plane, literally, where there was the works with, there's all these works that have these kind of like burnt orange, or I don't even know what color it is, this brownish orange ish colored pillows that we see in the photographs. And then they were all over the gallery as well. The physical, actual pillows were in the gallery. And it was just really, I just happened to walk into the gallery because it's a gigantic gallery with multiple doors. I happened to walk in through one of the center doors that immediately, sent me into one of the rooms with the pillows. And I was just like, wow, the not only are there pillows there, but they're in the middle of the floor, which is inviting visitors to sit on them and interact with them, which I certainly did. I immediately sat on one of the pillows because, and then it added this other element to the work where it's like, I'm looking at this photograph, but now I become a participant in that. And can you talk about that? Like, was that your intent behind it? Or again, I realized you were definitely playing with photography, and you're playing with our sensibilities of what photography is or isn't and what it can do.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's been a lot, like, I've always thought about scale in relation to the photographs, that's why, particularly like, there was a moment where I kind of thought about this one being like 3 times as big as it was, which would have taken up an entire wall, but for all practical purposes, making, a 75 by 50 photograph is pretty big.
Pretty huge.
But like these ones here, kind of like 56 by 75, I wanted the objects in these to approach kind of like a sculptural element, especially in images, and also images like this, where the camera is at the center. At that scale, like, if from a viewing distance, it kind of approximates life size in a sense, like in a sense it recedes. But it's, so I've been interested in this thing of like, where, especially these things that are made in the mirror, where it, like, this camera's pointing at you, it kind of like implicates you, but then you're like, oh, this is in a mirror. So it's like, I'm not in front of this. So then when it came to ones like these, I was like, people have often said, oh, would you put a mirror in the gallery? Or, and there was, when I was starting on stuff in grad school too, with the early mirror stuff, it was like, oh, do you put an actual one? I was like, no, I don't like that. So in this, putting the, having benches made from the same wood that I use, the same wood is the same wood that I use for the frames for the work when it's on the wall. And then bringing these pillows was a way for, and I wish I had, oh yeah, if someone wants to see them, I wish I had a view where someone was sitting on them. But I was interested in like sitting here, seeing these, having like a kind of a relationship to them. And especially like this one here with like in front of Zach, like I love the way he's like like he's leaning over these ones, and they're just like squished under his body, that like someone sitting on these would kind of
mimic that. Yeah.
Those pillows or something,
I mean, yeah. And with this particular image also, it's just like, I feel like most of your images have had this really kind of soft tenderness to them, when there's figures interacting with each other. And that particular image, it just goes straight into eroticism and into that. And, is that also a break for you, or a different direction where you're,
yeah.
I mean, I saw that was some of the stuff you were doing in the earlier, in some of your earlier portfolio, but it feels like this is kind of new again.
Yeah, I mean, I did a project, like kind of the little beginnings of this, like what year is it? Yeah, back in the spring in New York, in a project called DRMP. And that was like all images made with this friend Caleb here. Like in in all of the images, none of our faces were visible.
Got it.
But it was like, I was kind of like, okay, I wanted to, do, I'd never done a show that was presenting work like all around one kind of thing where like this friendship turns into like this double like muses, like we became each other's, like we become each other's muses off and on. And that one I was just kind of like, okay, I just want to like push things, I just want to like I was just like, let's try making stuff more explicit. There are images in like, there was a show in New York at Team Gallery in 2019 that I really called The Conditions, that I was really, really happy with for the reason that it included. Also to note, like all the images that I'm showing here today are all like male identified people, but that's not all of the work. And over the years, there are friends who are women, there are friends who are trans, there are friends who are non-binary, there are people who have transitioned several times, but this project has focused on a particular kind of like homoerotic, like gay. I just say it. Sometimes it's fine to just say work is gay.
Yeah.
The idea of like the end goal of all of this, of building space and like in community is for like complete open-ended queerness, but sometimes you just gotta like say what something is. But I loved that show at The Conditions because it included everything from like a life-size portrait of my friend while she was 5 months pregnant to a picture of like a three-way blowjob to like pictures of both male and female people clothed and unclothed, that in a sense there was not this separation that had been happening between like images that are erotically suggestive that aren't really that way, and a thing that happened that was often excluding like non-male subjects from the work. So anyways, so that is the context to like, this isn't the first set of images that are really pushing that, but I just wanted to kind of again include like everything, and they're all like all of the images, like within what you would say like as a photo shoot, you're going to select images, it's like, okay, you pick this one from this one, this one from this one, right? Like, so in a sense, from any of them, and I know this was a question you'd kind of mentioned, talking about like how does like a portrait sitting work or making images, right?
Yeah, please.
It's like you kind of go through, kind of like play through all of the aspects of like friendship and all the way, and so there's, in many things, it will be like a whole breadth of things, from like a very demure portrait to like, okay, now let's like, like you run into each other in the dark room, like, and everything. And so I just loved this. I loved this this image made with Zach. And again, because I had been thinking about these closed loops, and I was just like, I think I'd been like, okay, lean like this, like on here. And then I was just like, okay, like, I was just like, let's just, like, I think he was like looking at me and I was just like, I'm going to stick my hand in your mouth. It's like, but I like the like his eyes, and I guess maybe I can zoom in here, but like, I just loved that moment so much. I'm sorry, these are like, this isn't the highest res. It's just a little JPEG, so you can't really see.
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
But yeah, so, so there's images like, but I like that there's images like of this where there is the suggestion of like, okay, so much more could be happening, to like an image like this that's like, has, I think, a charge, but you're like, okay, the figures are simply hugging.
Yeah.
Like it's this, but both of the figures are nude, right? To like this image of two friends of mine who are just like, who are having sex in the studio.
Okay.
Like it goes through everything, this is an image of like two people making like a long exposure of two people, I think, photographing. Like you can see one, like there's a little bit of blue light here. Like I think that's a bit of a light from someone's digital camera.
Oh, wow.
so it's like making images side by side. It's like bodies embracing, bodies like hardcore, bodies that are just sort of like lightly touching, you know. But I know, okay, it's like 4:52, and I know you were like wanting people to be able to ask questions.
You're right. Thank you for the reminder. I'm not familiar with this, so I'm gonna ask it and tell me if you know anything. Someone is asking if the work of Lucas Samaras has ever been a reference, positively or not, formally or otherwise.
Oh, always. I mean, I definitely was like, probably, I think, introduced to Lucas Samaras's work as an undergrad in New York. Several of my undergrad professors are like of his generation. I did a show in Mexico City with this New York gallery, Mitchell, Innes, and Nash. And it started off, it was a 3-person show with me and Lucas Samaras and Tiana Nakia McLauden. And, you know, when they first reached out and I was like, they asked who I might, when it was just me and they're like, let's do like a pairing, you know, one of the first people I thought about was like, this could be Asking for the Stars. This is like, you know, but like, what about Lucas Samaras? Because of the way in which like, the, you know, yeah, the use of the lights, the kind of staging, he used his apartment and had friends coming through sittings. There's a whole series from the 80s. These like really amazing, I think they're called like, I think it's Kodachrome, Sebachromes. The color is so intense, really playing around with that. But there's also these like, oh, I'm forgetting which name it is. One of the, not Seydou Keita.
Malik Sidibe.
Not Sidibe. It's another West African photographer. Where there's, I have one of them pinned on my studio. Where
I'm like, today, you probably know she's been working on this recently.
But there's these images where they're pulled back and you see like the clip lights on the stands around the subjects, the whole thing. Like, so, but anyways, this Lucas Samaras, absolutely. But like, you know, before him, there were other people doing it. Like, he's someone who really like, you know, color, but you know, that his use of color you can see coming from, you know, I'm just like assuming he's someone who's like really into like Jack Smith's work or things like this, the whole like, you know, New York queer scene of the 70s. So anyways, yeah. Yes.
That's awesome. Who else are your major influences?
Oh God, there's so much. I kind of wouldn't know where to begin.
Just one or two
influences, and then there's like when you start working on things and then you discover a whole like world of people who had already done that, and then you're like, oh wow, like art ancestors who I didn't, you know, like I would say like Rotimi Fani-Kayode is like a huge inspiration now. For many reasons, I didn't know his work until I had started making some images that were brought to my attention looked very much like his. And then you have to start to be like, okay, let me pay some respect here and like look into this, right? I always sort of say like no artist like owns the things that we do in our photographs.
Yeah, for sure, like, for sure. Or any practice.
Things, you know. Like, I mean, Talia Chetrit is a New York-based photographer and someone we're about the same age, and kind of like when I lived in New York, we overlapped a lot. And she's been making this really amazing work in the studio, like with herself, with her partner, now with their baby, you know, but it's just like, again, you know, like that's sort of like, in a sense, like a contemporary. There's other, you know, many other kind of like contemporaries that I think about. I don't know. There's too many.
There's so many of them. I love it that you're, you know, even folks who like you weren't aware of and someone brought to your attention. You know, just that mutual recognition, which I think we need a lot more of. No, there's so many artists that are like, no, I'm not influenced by any of them. I just created this in this void that I imagined for myself that doesn't exist. So I appreciate that. Much respect for that.
I'm gonna try to wait, I'm gonna turn this light on real quick. Away from the window and staying with this inside light.
Oh yeah, that looks great. That works. We can see your face, which is
Okay.
which is the important part. Yeah, that's a really good angle right there as well. Look at me, I could be your lighting assistant. We have another question from Sam in the Q&A. Since much of your early work first blew up online in places like Tumblr, have you ever considered the aesthetic role of the internet and how people encounter it in your work recently?
Yes, good question. I mean, that was the whole idea behind the DRMP show in New York, was everything was pointing towards like these screens. And it's something that had kind of come up in the show that I did in here in LA, the first show I did at Vielmetter, but like hardly anyone saw that show because it opened when
In the
the same
pandemic,
day that COVID shut everything down.
yeah.
But again, it was pointing to these screens, and you know, none of the subjects' faces were visible. The only things that were sort of like identifiable were those things that were already sort of like circulating online. And so the particular kind of screens that were captured pointed to everything from like Instagram to Tumblr to OnlyFans to like everything in between. And it was sort of like this way in which people might be sort of like surfing on the online space and accidentally encounter artwork, you know, and suddenly it's like something strange shows up and you're like, wait, what is that falls out? So it was kind of a way of like bringing those two things together. I mean, I've done projects about this stuff in the past as well. There was a show that Nayland Blake curated at ICA Boston that included some works from like 2013. I did a lot of work around tracing where dozens of my images had circulated on Tumblr and tracing like the entire Tumblr histories of them and screen grabbing them in the context of people's pages. So you would have, they kind of became these collages of like everything in proximity on these timestamps. Yeah, I think about that a lot.
That's pretty incredible. I love the fact that you're also referencing how your work is being referenced by other people and has all these other lives. We just have a last minute remaining for our conversation. This has gone by really, really fast. I didn't get to half of the questions, but we went into some great places. Can you tell everyone, today put your website into the comments here, but can you just let everyone know, what's next for you? Where can we see shows of you? What fairs do you have coming up? What residencies?
I'll stop sharing. This show is up in Hamburg through the end of February. And then there's shows in Paris and Zurich in June. There's some stuff up at SFMoMA right now.
I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
I believe the show's called Sightlines. And then there's going to be some more stuff up. I think a whole gallery worth of work up at SFMoMA.
Wow.
Maybe later this spring or summer. I should find at some point. It's still in, yeah.
Yeah, again, I mean, we understand you have a million shows going on at one time. You're a busy, busy guy.
Yeah. And that's and then kind of a project with the Getty, kind of an ongoing conversation. It's actually around like 19th century French photographer Hippolyte Bayard. That kind of bled into the thinking of some of this work, because I didn't even get to all the elements in the studio and those images I show. We're all thinking about 19th century like Western European and North American photo studios, and like just the ways in which like black and brown bodies, and also, but not isolated, but also because all of the subjects going through are of, I think, pretty much every race and ethnicity, but just the ways in which the history of those spaces has historically like constructed, gendered, sexualized, and racialized like forms that we're still kind of like dealing with today. Anyway, so yeah, the Hippolyte Bayard stuff, 19th century French stuff at the Getty. I think that's it.
That's a lot. That is a full schedule for the next just few months coming up. You just said basically for the next through the summer. That's major. Congratulations on all that. And I hope I get to go to some of those and actually meet you in person. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here today and just sharing your practice and yourself with us. This has been really amazing. Thank you for all of our guests and your wonderful questions and interactions. If you joined us a little late, this conversation will be immediately available on MOAD's Facebook page, immediately following it, and then it'll be on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. We really appreciate you.
Yay. Thanks, Dimitri, and thanks, Seti. Yeah, let me know if you're in LA.
Yeah, for sure. Most definitely. I will hit you up. Have a wonderful evening.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, okay, everyone. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.